MacVoices is supported by Raycon, the makers of quality earbuds. Get 15% off your order at buyraycon.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, today we're going to talk about interfaces from a little bit different angle. And I'm going to explain that. Well, no, I'm not going to explain it. Our guest is going to explain it. Brittany Smith is back to talk to us about interfaces. Brittany, welcome. It's good to see you again.
Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here again.
Well, I'm delighted to have you here to have this discussion. You and I traded a couple emails about how you look at not necessarily interface design, but I guess a finished interface from a little bit different angle because of what you do. And so I'm going to kind of leave it there and let you describe, first of all, what you do and then how it fits into what we're talking about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my background is cognitive neuroscience. So I have a degree studying cognition, and that's awesome. And I started developing a lot of techniques while I was in grad school still. So I'd be reading a research paper about this particular type of cognition, and then I'd be observing how I would interact with my devices, like as I would go through my day, based on the things I was reading about. In fact, it's one of the things that sort of converted me from a Mac user into a Mac lover was my new appreciation of how many ways in which, like, the much more visually complicated designs that I had given up on my PC were a lot more simple and refined in a lot of places on my Mac, so that it wasn't causing some of the cognitive drain I'd read papers about.
And so before someone tunes out and says, well, this is clearly not for me, no, it is for you. And here's why. Because the odds are that in one way or another, you have used the options that Apple gives you to customize your Mac, your iPhone, your iPad. Might be desktop pictures, might be list view versus icon view versus grid view versus all those other views that they give you. There's so many ways that we all customize our interfaces to suit us. And most of the time, I believe we think of them as cosmetic, when in reality, they really are functional, and we don't even think about it. It's just, okay, this is the way I like to look at it. And that somewhere in the back of my brain, in parentheses, it's saying, because this works better for me. And so I think taking that back of the brain stuff and bringing to the front makes us all understand why things appeal to us a little better, and maybe might even help us understand how we can customize our own interfaces a little better. Or am I overstating the
Oh, no, that's so true. And I used to be the person who said, oh, it doesn't matter what color it is. And to an extent, maybe for you, some things don't. But these subtle cues that our tools give us have such a powerful impact on our work and on our productivity. And really even the choice to not organize, say, your apps on your iPhone, and at least up through iOS 13, just they're in default mess order. That's a choice too. And that has an impact that is separate from the choice to do something with them.
Okay, so now I feel like I'm treading into dangerous territory because I'm afraid you may psychoanalyze me about my personal preferences. So I'm going to be careful about what I tell you. But so tell me where you want to start, because again, you and I have traded some emails, and like there are things that you've wanted to talk about somewhere that you really haven't had the opportunity. So I said, well, come on and let's talk about it. I think it has the potential to be really interesting to people, as long as they understand why it might be interesting to them.
Yeah. So you started with the ideas around on making some choices and around environment, right? I guess I have so many things I want to talk about. I more want to know where you want to start.
Okay, well then this may turn into a series, folks, and if it does, that's great. So let's start with the Mac, only because we're both right now on Macs, looking at that. So, I personally like list view, let's say. Well, no, that's true. I like list view. I find it orderly. I find it I find it sortable because it is, so sometimes
right?
I want to see what I worked on most recently. Sometimes I want to, can't find what I'm looking for, so I'll sort it alphabetically. Um, I mean, what does that say about, I guess, the interface design or the approach to how I'm approaching what I'm doing?
What it probably means is that you're looking for, I mean, I can't psychoanalyze you. That's not what I do. But it probably means there's information that you're not getting from another source. You've made a choice. Like there are users who've never explored the different ways that their Finder can look, right? Or just use whatever the default is and maybe spend all their time in recents and don't know where anything is because that's the default. Um, but it sounds like what you want is more detailed information when you're looking at your files. Is that true?
Yeah, that's probably fair, because you're right. I mean, depending on what you're doing with what file, the size matters, the modification or the creation or modification dates matter. Obviously, the title
Mm-hmm.
matters to identify it. So yeah, all those things are important to my way of thinking. But you said something there that was interesting. You think some people just never explore that and just use the defaults. And
Mm-hmm.
in my experience, you're dead right. And when you show them something, they say, "Whoa, I didn't know it could do that." And of
Yeah.
course, mind blown. How could you not know?
Yeah, well, and people do hire me as a technology coach too to help them learn their system better and how to work with it. And I just spent 4 sessions with a wonderful client exploring the Mac Finder specifically and figuring out what's there and how she can really understand what lives where and what she should be doing with those different items. And yeah, we went over what are these different views? What are they good for? She decided she likes, I believe, the hierarchical view because she's really trying to understand where the files live. And so for her, that's going to matter more than a size or the date. She'll look at the date if she needs to.
Okay. So if I come to you and say, Brittany, I want to be your client and I want to know how I get started in evaluating what works for me,
Hmm.
where do we
Um,
start?
well, I'm always going to start with what's the end result? Like, what goal do you have for this? Because that's going to matter a lot. And
Well,
then
my
we'll dive into personal preference.
okay. Well, my goal is to be as productive as I can be. I mean, I'm juggling a lot of projects and a lot of different um, projects. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Projects that cut across a whole lot of different applications. And,
Mhm.
some are very visual, some are much more text intensive, some are collaborative, some are personal. So I've got this huge stew of stuff sitting here boiling away. And so I need you to help me make some sense of it.
Yeah, we'd probably start with a particular project type because right, there's no right solution for everything that you got to do. Like this client example that I was using, she's trying to organize all of the documents for her whole family and figure out where all the things are. And so, and one of the things we talked about in some length was how deep of a file system like folder structure she wants to use, and what are the cognitive trade-offs of. There's actually a really interesting book she brought to my attention. I haven't had a chance to read it yet that really actually dives into that and recommendations. As far as I can tell, they're more generic. It's on my to-do list. Uh, but how many do you go numb to when it's that deep? Or do you go numb to it? Do you search them visually? Do you use the spotlight instead? Like, how do you find the file when you need it? And that's going to matter a lot too. Um, in terms of like how deep you want to go. And of course, the deeper you go, the more maintenance it is, which is always a concern too.
That's an interesting point that I had not really thought about in that particular term is maintenance. Um,
Mm-hmm.
how long does it take me to maintain my sense of order? And you know what? Maybe I'll take that back because I use Gmail and I hardly ever store anything in files or folders. I may tag something occasionally, but for the most part, the search is good enough for me to find exactly what I
Mm-hmm.
want in short order.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes that is what works the best for folks. Some people like the clear inbox, and so they're going to just automatically hit the archive button, knowing that that search option is there. And that's an option too. when we're talking about email.
Right. Okay. You started out by saying you used to be one of those people that color didn't matter, and that you thought color
Oh,
didn't matter. And
yeah.
I want to explore a little more about that. I find that intriguing.
Yeah, this comes up a lot when I'm actually specifically talking about task management systems, because usually the people who hire an expensive coach to help them with their task management system have uh, certain needs or issues that are not being addressed. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about is going to be that gut feeling you have about the tools that you're using that impacts your productivity, which feels like an overstatement. It is just not. If I really hate how my task manager looks, I am just going to avoid interfacing it and avoid ever looking at my tasks. And that's going to be a huge problem. Or the calendar. If I hate how it looks, that's one less reason to look at it. And suddenly that tool is just useless at best, or at worst, a thing I feel guilty I'm not using because I have not like realized that the reason I'm not using it is because it's ugly, or if it's a paper one, I don't like how the paper feels, or some sensory input that's just not jiving with them, and it turns out it matters a lot.
Okay, that's I guess the only way.
I still don't care what color computer I buy, but
Yeah.
but in terms of like the colors of my calendars, I do care about that.
Well, I guess the way that I'm taking what you're saying, and probably anyone should take what you're saying, is that there are secondary cues above the primary ones
Hmm.
that really do matter, that affect how we look at what we're using.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And ease of use is another thing. If you have to click on something and go like even 2 layers deep before you can start using that particular app, is that too much friction for you to realistically make use of it? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
Okay, friction is an interesting word too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's why some of us love automation so much, is it's removing that friction of those tasks that otherwise I might procrastinate.
Or flip it around, sort of flip it around, I guess, that some of the reason that a lot of us procrastinate on automating things is because, not because we don't want to automate them, but it's just we don't want to take the time to do it.
True, true. Um, that is another one. Or if you don't know the steps, right? And that can be true of any project. If you aren't sure what the steps are, you don't always get started on it.
Right. So talk to me about, again, we're talking about the Mac, but if you want to branch out somewhere and go somewhere else, that's fine. Talk to me about the Mac interface, and what you like about it, what might be distracting, or what I can do to make it less distracting if that's something that bothers me.
Yeah, and there are a few ways. Now, the Mac is interesting in that there are in some ways more and in some ways less ways to interface with it than on iOS. So it really is a very different beast. Um, are you the kind of person who ever sees your desktop, for example? Like what your desktop looks like doesn't matter if you never look at your desktop and don't have transparency mode on. I can't tell you what my desktop looks like.
Are
So
you referring to the desktop picture, or is that what
I'm
you
the
mean?
desktop picture on your,
Okay.
like, do you ever look at your desktop? Is that a place where you are actively working with files? Is it a place you never go? Like you have that choice to completely skip over this very classic sort of interface. Do you use that sort of launchpad that not a lot of people on a Mac actually really do use, that was sort of supposed to be after iOS? Do you use that? Do you launch your apps from Spotlight or from a third-party launcher? Or do you open the applications folder in the sidebar on your Finder? Like how you do it, there's so many different options, and they change how you look at the computer and your interface with it drastically based on which one you choose. Oh, the dock. I forgot about the dock.
MacVoices is supported by Raycon, the makers of quality earbuds. Get 15% off your order at buyraycon.com/MacVoices. If you're in the market for wireless earbuds, then you definitely need to check out Raycon. With fantastic sound that is rich in bass and features a balanced, bright high end, Raycons just sound great. But that's just where it starts. With a 6-hour playtime, you won't be popping them in and out of the charging case very often. Oh, and yes, they do come with their very own charging case. When trying out Raycons for phone calls, the caller sounds clear and present, just like the music. And the callers also report that I sounded good too. So you can enjoy your Raycons for music or podcasts until the phone call comes in, and then answer it with no change of device or quality. And in case you missed it, these are wireless earbuds. No dangling cables to get tangled up in whatever else you're doing, and a fit that not only provides a great seal for great sound, but also assures that your earbuds won't fall out when you're active. So what are you waiting for? Now's the time to get the latest and greatest from Raycon. Get 15% off your order at buyraycon.com/MacVoices. That's BUYRAYCON.com/MacVoices for 15% off Raycon wireless earbuds. Buyraycon.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Raycon for their support of MacVoices. Okay, so explain what you mean by it changes, because it.
So what you have to look at in your visual field, start with how you like seeing your Finder, right? You like seeing a whole bunch of stuff. How much of what you're looking at is relevant to your task on hand? Do you have multiple Finder windows open at once? Do you have multiple Finder tabs open at once? Depending on what task you're doing, how much of the information on the screen is directly relevant? Or how do you get to that information on the screen? Do you always open Pages and then open the file from Pages, or do you open the file in Finder and then it takes you to Pages? There's so many more options on a Mac that way. And increasingly they exist on iOS, but it's not the default way we often interact with them on iOS. Does that make sense?
Yeah, listen, it makes.
I'm so in the weeds.
No. This is exactly what the kind of conversation I wanted to have, because I have my way of doing it, and the only time that I realize that my way of doing it is different from maybe your way of doing it is if I come to you and look over your shoulder, and then what, you do that? And you're right. Opening applications and then the documents from within the applications is a classic example of why are you going through those steps when you could just find the document, click it, and everything opens right there for you.
Mm-hmm. And I get the opportunity to look over a lot of shoulders. One of the hardest parts of my job is keeping my mouth shut sometimes. You could but that's not how they're working. That's not where they are. This is not helpful information. They're just going to second guess themselves, like holding back that, oh, you could do that more efficiently. That's actually one of the hardest things I do with people on their Macs.
Yeah, but isn't it fair isn't it fair to say that it might be part of your job to point out that there's a more efficient, more time-effective way to do things?
And that judgment call in that moment, that's the hard part.
Okay.
So I'm talking to the client with the Finder again, right? And we're going through the Finder and she's launching something. That's the time to bring up Spotlight. Maybe not the time to bring up, what was she doing? Each file she was doing the right click and over to open, on every file instead of double clicking it. And her way works just as well. It's not really saving more than a step. That's not helpful to her in that moment, right? But saying, oh, you could find that with the Spotlight. Remember, it's Command Space. That is helpful, right?
Okay.
And really, the first time I meet with somebody and go over their computer, I don't know their computing style yet. So I'm going to hold back more and not feel as comfortable, because the last thing I want to do as a coach is overwhelm somebody. They're usually coming to me if it's for technology because they're already overwhelmed.
So
I want to give them just the right amount of information. It's like good parenting.
Well, and listen, you're teaching me here, because there are times that I have not made those decisions in that moment, or I've made the decision to say, hey, there's a better way to do this. And sometimes it's well received and sometimes it's not. A lot of the time it's like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. Now, whether they adopt it or not, that's a whole nother discussion. But at least I've shown them that there's that option.
Mm-hmm.
but I never really thought about it as potentially being a detriment to their learning.
Yeah, it just depends where they are, and what the goal is. And if that thing is like not relevant to their goal, not that I never blurt out the thing accidentally. I do. I'm a nerd. Sometimes I get excited and I can't help it. But I try to make the right judgment call in that moment. And usually it ends up being very well received. Oh, right. That's a thing. And sometimes it's a reminder of something we had talked about before that, it had been a few weeks since we met and they hadn't really worked it into their system yet.
Yeah, but, okay, you just referred to yourself as a nerd, and in
No
this
secret.
environment, well, yeah, but in this environment, that's a positive, or at least it's an accepted title that does
Yeah.
not. But there are nerds out there that don't. They don't think about some of these things. They just like, well, no, that's wrong. This is the way you should do it, and that's where people, I think, get into trouble or have a negative feeling about
Mhm.
those of us that identify as geeks or nerds or whatever. That will. I don't like being talked down to. I don't like being told what to do, as opposed to you're showing them something that you think you can help, and doing so in a friendly, approachable way.
Mhm. And there are different solutions and they're all interesting. And, if I'm really lucky, maybe I'll learn something.
Good point. Good point.
Um, you know, that's not always true, but at the very least, what have I learned? I've learned that there's this other person who does it this way. And why is that important to them? Why does that work for them? And that can be really interesting too. To bring it back to interface though, I will try to figure out what are the things that they feel overwhelmed and bothered by, and maybe mention reducing some of the stuff on the screen. Like a lot of people's favorite tools, and it's mine too, is Bartender. Like, I don't need to see all those icons all the time. I just don't. They're cluttering up my visual field. They're not usually giving me new information. Like, I don't need that. So those are some of the things that I might suggest just cleaning it up so it's easier to see.
Do you run into situations though where that the visual clutter is not an issue? That maybe the individual can or does focus on what they need to, and the fact that there's all this clutter around really doesn't affect them?
Yeah, it depends on what we're looking at, right? In some ways, I do think people are less bothered by some of it and sometimes it's useful. Like, a lot of people would hate what watch face I have. I have, the one with all of the information on it. But I know what quadrant to look at to figure out what temperature it is, or if I'm likely to get sunburnt or whatever, And so for me, that works because it's got the information I want at the right spot. If I care about the size of my files and the date it was last modified, I want to see it in detail view. If I'm trying to figure out where it is, that is the extra information that's useful. Where I do see it getting the drain that a lot of the clutter causes is not always conscious. And I feel like as Apple nerds, I can explain this on a different level. When you look at somebody's Samsung phone with a zillion colorful things in the background and their icons spread all over the place and everything's in Comic Sans, you have a gut reaction to that. Like,
Okay, go ahead. I agree with you, but go ahead.
and that is a lot of visual clutter, and that is some of that stuff that over time really just sort of drains you. And one of my big rails is against having badges that mean nothing. Like, and in the image that we talked about earlier before we got on, there's a very classic cognitive psychology paradigm called the visual search. And when you think about it, there's a simple search. For example, I'm looking at a screen full of blue X's and there's one red X. How fast can you hit the button saying that you saw the thing? It's pretty fast. And you're not going to be that tired if you do that all day, if you do that for an hour. And then the complex search is going to be something more like you're looking at a field of blue squares and orange triangles, but you're looking for the one orange square. That gets difficult after a little while, and it gets draining. And our screens are so much more complicated than that usually. And so I do think on iOS, it impacts us actually a little bit more, because you're looking at, I mean, they even said in the iOS 14 keynote, like, people look at their home screens a lot, but not for a very long period of time. And I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm trying to find the thing visually. After a while, it gets exhausting, and our feelings about our devices isn't as positive. And for me, a lot of times I see even iOS phones and I get that sort of, oh, Comic Sans reaction that we'll get to like the Samsung phones sometimes. Not to totally beat up on Samsung. The friend I'm thinking about, her screen, it was a Samsung.
Okay, but so how does one get to that point? I mean, why does your friend choose? Because if it's the mess you're talking about, sorry, friend, but if it's the mess you're talking about, then obviously she at some point created that mess, and she's maintaining that mess. Again, to go back to one of your other concepts. So there's
you can do it. It just adds to your background sort of low-level stress over the course of the days and weeks. Or you could just not interface with your phone hardly at all, and then it doesn't bother you very much. But if you are looking at it a lot, it can just be a sort of unconscious psychological numbing in a way. Doesn't mean it's not doable. You can totally do it. People do it all the time. They just like that background. And I didn't feel like organizing my apps, but then it takes a long time to find something or something like that. Sorry.
Okay, but I guess I still go back, but you just said subconscious or unconscious, and that's intriguing to me, because there are times I wonder if maybe things that I do or ways I choose to organize certain things is putting stress or is creating stress, and maybe the fact that I'm wondering about that says that it's moving from sub to conscious. We'll have more with Brittany Smith on the cognitive aspects of interfaces in the next edition of MacVoices. Then she'll show us some concrete examples of iPhone interfaces and what maybe we can do to make ours a little more efficient and a little less stressful. That's next time on MacVoices. Until then, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.